Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Inspired Learning Project Digital Conversation. As you know, the Inspired Learning Project is a group of teachers and leaders who get together regularly to talk about the important work of reimagining schools to become inspiring places of learning. We have our blog that we host regularly, but one of the key highlights of our project is the chance to interview educators who are doing tough work to reimagine school, share their work, engage in conversation, and learn a little bit about the things we can do in our own schools to make each school day a little more inspiring for our students. Today, we have sort of the definition of inspiration, having Don Wettrick join us. Don is a teacher and an author and a professional development provider, and I've been referring to him as an educational adventurer for all the things that he's done. And we're talking about changing school through student entrepreneurship, something that he is an expert on. And as an entrepreneur and as an innovator, he's lived that design cycle and iterative cycle in his own professional work. So, Don, we're thrilled to have you here today.
I'm thrilled to be on, actually.
Awesome. Great. Welcome. As we get ready, to begin our interview, I'm going to kick it over to Dave Quinn, who will kick it off for us.
Thanks so much, John. Don, really great to see you once again. In our recent blog post, we shared your recent interview with Manu, who will, a young entrepreneur who we'll talk a little bit about later. But we've pitched you as a teacher, an author, the CEO of StartEdUp, as John said, an education adventurer, somebody who not only talks the talk and walks the walk, but makes the work public. But I think it's most important that the person themselves share their story. So can you, for the 5 people who are watching who may not know who you are, the rest, I'm sure you're well known, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work?
Sure. My name is Don Wettrick, like you said. I am a teacher at Noblesville High School, which is a suburban school outside of Indianapolis, Indiana. And the work I do is I have this class called Innovation and Open Source Learning. And that is to say, the first 7 or so weeks, maybe up to 9 weeks, we teach our students how to be innovative. We teach them how to reframe problems, how to look for opportunities, how to take your social media seriously, especially LinkedIn if you're in high school. Little techniques that we've picked up here and there on innovation and spotting trends and things like this. And then the rest of it is like open source learning. And by open source learning, after you find some opportunities, you're going to have a skill set. Well, it's a skill set I may not be able to teach. But by open sourcing your learning, you can then work with the best. And that's the craziest time we live in. Right now, you can reach out to people who are way more successful and way more insightful in some areas than me. And why not work with them? And so that's thus the open source learning part. And so little by little, we've just kind of been, like you said before, we've been very transparent with the class. We've had some successes. We've had some major flops. But such is the life of the entrepreneur, right? And we really embrace that to where we have these mantras. And one of them is, it sounds cliche, but, fail early, fail often, and recover from it. But our I sign off darn near every podcast with opportunities are everywhere. And I always want to remind people of that because people like to complain about things, but with every complaint, there's a sweet nugget of awesomeness right around the corner. And, find those opportunities and seize on it. And that's what we try to inspire our students to do is have that mindset of finding opportunities.
So Don, one of the ways that I got introduced to your work was through your book, Pure Genius, which if you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's a great kind of on-ramp to, passion or interest-based learning. But I wanted to if you could talk to our audience a little bit about how you got started, how you made that switch to interest-driven learning, because I think what you're talking about is really awesome. I'm curious about how that evolution got started.
Yeah, I love it because there's a single origin point. I mean, literally the defining moment was an email that I got, and I still have it because I always wanted to archive it. It said, watch this. And it was a link to a TED Talk by Daniel Pink. And that TED Talk was his famous, what motivates people. And he went into really what now educators call genius hour or 20% time. And so I'm watching that. I'm like, okay, why the heck don't we do this in education? Why don't we give a small part of our class week dedicated towards inquiry and interest and passions. And, I gave it a try and it went fairly well. And this is early in my, I don't have many Twitter follower kind of thing. And I was like, you know what? That Mr. Pink guy, I was completely naive that he had written a couple of books, but I'm like, I'm just going to call him. And he got back with us. And I'm like, hey, bro, we're going to start a class based around your, TED Talk. He's great. And so that got us our start. And then really his endorsement and his willingness to Skype in a couple times and talk to the kids lent to some credibility. And so, because if it weren't for that, I mean, just getting that crazy, wacky course approved, it didn't hurt that Dan was involved. And just, this crucial early years of this kids having to not dropping Yoda lines on you, but unlearning what they have learned. The class was just a little bit strange, a little bit weird. So anyway, that was kind of the origin. So we grew from that class. Well, we grew really from what we now know as Genius Hour. We didn't have a name for it, but it was a flop. But in those flops, I realized that there was a couple things here and there I wanted to replicate. And so then we asked for our own course, and then the own course grew, and then I decided to write a book about it, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you're being super humble about it, Don. I think I want to get into your podcast in a minute, but I remember listening to the podcast you did with Dan, and you realized that that 20% of the time just really wasn't enough in a class, and you were talking about the need to grow it out. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that realization?
Okay, I promised myself I wouldn't get emotional. No, I love Genius Hour in elementary school, and I really think it's optimized for middle school. And that is to say, you can, as an elementary school teacher, you should do this. There should be a part of your school day that you're allowing them to, because their curiosity is crazy and awesome at that age. At the middle school, when I get teachers say, well, I can't, I have to teach the standards. Can you do it once a month? And the answer is yes, because if you're teamed, and most schools, middle schools are, you're giving up 1 class per month, because this week it's, your 30 minutes of Genius Hour or in English, and the next week it's math, next week it's science, et cetera, et cetera. At the high school level, I really believe that it deserves its own class, because innovation, especially at this age, when they start open sourcing their learning and they start working with people that are awesome, it deserves its own hour and a half. And especially because it's even the things that we say, sometimes reluctantly, oh, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I hear people lament that, but I'm like, geez, dude, teachers know everybody, right? It's the reason why some of us get into insurance when we want to retire, because we know everybody. So why not put that to the test and put that up so you can introduce your students to some people that are going to help your kids. Or if you are a social media person, you can put out hey guys, who wants to talk to my student who wants to know more about needlepoint or coding and Python or whatever. And I think that it's that hour and a half that they really start to grow, because I have an hour and a half class every other day on a block schedule, and we need it. Just doing a 20-minute thing in one class, in my humble opinion, I have no qualms with teachers that want to give this a go at high school, and that's their first introduction into it. But eventually, if the kids are excited about it, they're like, dude, 20 minutes on a Friday? Seriously? It's not enough. And it's not.
I want to give folks a chance to jump in. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in our chat. I know our audience can't see them. I do have one more kind of follow-up question about that same podcast. One of the big challenges, I think, when you talk to teachers about Genius Hour is this idea of passion versus interests. And I thought that was a really interesting part of your conversation with Dan. You talked about, taking one bite out of the elephant. Can you talk about your experience about shifting the focus maybe from passion to interest, and then how interest become passions?
Interest is sustainable. Passion is you at 16 seeing the first girl you love, right? That's a really simple way of saying it. Although passions can sustain. I'm very passionate about my wife, who ironically enough, we started dating when we were 16. But passion is a tricky word. Interest in I really want to know more is where I like it. Although I will say this, and I'm about to contradict what I just said, I'm also a big fan of quitting. If you are like, dude, you know what, I'm really passionate about, and then you list something and you start getting into it, and then about 2 weeks into it, you're like, wait, I don't like this. Stop. This is what we used to call changing your major in college. Now that you actually started doing it, you don't like it. So I'm okay with you giving it a trial run and then saying, this fundamentally isn't for me. I look, I believe in that whole grit and resilient thing. I do. But when you're in the fabric, you're being like, I thought this was different. I hate it. Stop, mark it on your list, mark it off your list, move on to something else.
Also, I think it's critical that educators give students the time to fail, to try, and then, like you said, change their mind, because it's not useful putting all of your energies to be something that you're mediocre at when you're called to be something great. So one kind of shifting gears to something that you did sustain some passion. Can you talk to us a little bit about the podcast that you do? You work with Hunter on that. Tell us a little bit about the evolution and how it's come to be the success that it is right now.
The evolution is that we were having these really neat entrepreneurs call into our class, and one was really a big name, and our student turned around and he's like, "Are you recording these?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he says, "You should put them out as a podcast because they're good for just." And there's two reasons why I started that. I put out an email to others teachers. I'm like, hey, we've got Tim Ferriss. We had him for 2 hours. Wow. Dollar-wise, that is expensive. It's free, of course.
Yeah.
And I was like, does anybody want to come down, talk to Tim Ferriss? And they're like, did he invent the Ferris wheel?
Yeah.
Who is Tim Ferriss? And I don't, that's fine. They don't know him. But then I realized that a lot of teachers, no offense, knew who some of the usual suspects were in the ed tech / theory lecture circuit, but they didn't know, in my opinion, true visionaries who were also very opinionated about education and kind of ahead of the curve. And Tim is one of those. Seth Godin is at the top of that mountain. Dan Pink, obviously so. Tina Seelig. These are people that I was like, you don't know who Tina Seelig is? And probably people right now are like Googling Tina Seelig. But that was one of the reasons why I was like, I want to do a podcast and to introduce people that you should know. And then quite frankly, it's just cool to talk to people that I look up to. And I'm like, what was that? What was that Saturday Night Live skit? It was the Chris Farley show.
Yeah.
Remember that time when you were in the Beatles?
That was awesome.
Yeah, that was awesome. So yeah, I try not to Chris Farley it too bad, but there's some people that I get to talk to. I'm like, remember that time? So it's fun. It's an excuse to talk to neat people.
Marianne, you had a question for Don.
Yeah, thank you. So one of my questions is you're talking about urgency and people, kind of raising their awareness of what's going on. And, I think we can listen to the Seth Godins of the world or your podcast and, you're talking to the people that are already fired up. They want to do some of the same work that you're doing. So thinking about your role as an educator, your everyday, how do you go about increasing that sense of urgency and the people that you're working with on a regular basis?
Oh, that's a great question. And this is where you don't make friends, right? Because the urgency's there. And sometimes, I can get emotional or, get upset, like how many former students I know are in crippling debt because they had this generalist degree because their mom and dad told them that it doesn't matter what degree and you'll get a job. And that is no longer true. But I also like to point, and again, I keep circling back to parents, because the parents, I think, are ones really putting on the pressure. And then the societal pressure of, oh, you're not going to go to a traditional college? Oh, what's wrong with you? Thank God for people like Mike Rowe. And there's been some other voices now that are sounding the alarms of like, look, just getting that general studies major is dangerous and expensive and financially damaging. And again, I guess one of the reasons why I have a podcast too. I mean, I've got a lot of my guests are very opinionated about this. And so, if a student wants to talk to me, I'll talk to them. If a parent wants to talk to me, I'll talk to them about it. Heck, even in my own home, Ava, my oldest, was really torn on whether she wanted to go to college or not. She's got a 3.9. But she, like her dad, tragically, she wanted to go the entrepreneurial track. And, but I will say there's been this new, I've seen a lot more in culture and media, this like, let's rethink again this everybody goes to college thing. Maybe it's not a good idea after all. So I'm enjoying that dialogue that we're having now. But like I said, at the very top of the question, it also sometimes makes me wildly unpopular. I think that, if we were to literally invent school in 2019 and we had to come up with 30 different classes and electives, we wouldn't have the same ones we have right now. There's just no way. And so it's time to rethink about what's needed and how long it's needed and what needs to possibly be replaced. So, but those are tough conversations to have because you're literally looking at a teacher possibly and them asking, well, are you saying my class is irrelevant? And you having the guts to say, yes, it is. And that's a tough thing.
Yeah. Content it becomes personal. It's very closely tied to our educators.
Which I just saw thank you. So what type of courses do you think we should have? And we could rewrite them. Thank you, Maureen, for putting me on the spot. This is going to sound foo-foo-y, and you're like, this is where people possibly log off. Personal branding 101. My own children, in fact, if you want me to, I can call one of them in right now. They will tell you, I tell my own children, if your life was a book, would anybody read it? Nobody reads chapter 1. I scrolled through my Instagram today. Chapter 2, I chilled. Chapter 3, I checked my Twitter today. No one cares. However, if you start branding good work, the world is yours, especially if you're young. I hate to say the word I make them, but I darn near make my students be on LinkedIn, because how many 16-year-olds are on LinkedIn? Answer, my students, not many else. I mean, it's like they're shockingly low. So if you're on a mission and your mission is good and your mission is just, you know what? Adults think that that's cool. If you're not flipping off the camera and duck face selfies and all these things that are terrible, then adults are like, bro, you're pretty awesome. So I dig that. So social media branding is, what message are you portraying? Now, this is not social media, digital citizenship. This is a list of things you cannot do. The kids already know what they shouldn't do. They don't have a list of things that they could propel themselves forward right now. Writing blogs. I had this discussion with the teacher that she had a daughter that she was rethinking whether she wanted to go to grad school to be a writer. And I'm like, no offense, but I understand her point. Well, how is she going to become a good writer? Freaking start a blog? Well, it's not that simple. I said, how many degrees does Stephen King have? She's like, I don't know. I just read his books. Case in point. Like, if a student wants to write a blog or write a book, half the time it's impressive. Like, if a 16-year-old writes a book and a 32-year-old writes a book, I know who has a marketing advantage. It's the 16-year-old, if they leverage all these tools. So that's my top. My second, and this is where it's rhetorical and everybody said this, personal finance and how to avoid paying exorbitant taxes. Heck, every teacher could do this as well. Did you know, I'm passionate about this, did you know that not only can you max out your 403B Roth, because if you're doing a traditional, that's just silly. Always go Roth. It's tax advantaged on the back end. But there's also a nice little teacher only, and I think police get it too, 457 plan. 457 plans are also tax advantage. You can get your taxable income tax. It's amazing, especially if you're married and your spouse isn't a teacher. Sock as much away as you can in the Roth, and if you've maxed out your Roth, you can always tuck it into a 457. I'm sorry. I'm now going on. I'm sorry. I'm going off the rails, but those are my top two: social media branding, personal finance, with real advice.
I think those are two really interesting courses. I'd actually be interested if anybody on the panel has a course they would love to see run. But tied in with that, Don, I keep bringing up this podcast, but I thought Dan raised a really good point about personal biases, cognitive biases, to make it self-awareness. And then one of my kind of personal passions right now, and I think it's tied into branding, is storytelling, right? You could have like the most interesting life in the world, but if you can't craft it into a story, that's distillable, and you can't communicate that idea, you lose some of those leverage. And I think that goes into that piece you were talking about, taking advantage of all the tools that you have available. So how do you craft that personal narrative in a way that's compelling to people?
You start off with the knowledge that right now the two most valued things in the world, other than data is huge, it's attention and trust. You're absolutely correct when you say, how do you get that story? Well, you have to get people's attention. And then when you have it, then you have to maintain their trust. I think we've seen YouTube stars come and go because they did something asinine. Well, they had your attention for a while. They made a little money and then they went stupid. So attention and trust. And this is also where some people get especially like us educators. I used to be a little bit more humble, but sometimes if you're not talking about your cool work, who's going to? So that I want to get your attention. My students are doing some cool things. Okay, now that I have your attention, here's some value. That attention and trust, providing value is so huge, especially if you can learn it early. I'm telling you, at age 16, some of my kids have figured it out. And it's not kissing up. It's providing value. And I even tell them, when you're 45, if you meet some 16-year-old that goes, I want to be like you someday. What are you doing? How can I get there? What's your secret? You'd feel pretty flattered and you'd help them. So get out there and build that narrative, get people's attention, build those relationships, provide value.
So I think one of the challenges with entrepreneurial education, or the need for entrepreneurial education, is that a lot of kids don't have parents who were entrepreneurs themselves, right? They don't have a model to follow. I know growing up that my father's advice was do well in school so you could go to a good college so you get a good job and then you can live comfortably. But what I think, and I think is really kind of critical, is that you're providing that space and resource with your new foundation. And I wanted just to can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing entrepreneurial education to classrooms across the country? Well,
thank you. Well, first of all, one, it's so desperately needed because according to Forbes and a couple other surveys I've seen, by the year 2020, half the United States jobs will be freelance, which means if you're not out there looking for your opportunity, no one else will. So entrepreneurial can mean you can freelance. Intrapreneurial means that you can be the most valued person at your company and they will beg for you because you're finding opportunities. But yeah, what we're doing with both StartEdUp LLC and now I'm really proud about the StartEdUp Foundation, which is our tax accountants weren't happy that we kept it the same name. But we have actually, I'm kind of proud of this. We're the nation's first venture fund for high school students. And actually, I don't even know if I can call it venture fund because we expect no extra money back. It's not free money. We want our money back. But if you fail, it's on us. And if you succeed, we want our principal back. We take no equity because we believe there's a lot of 16-year-olds out there. They just need some money, media, and mentors. They've got an idea. They may even scale it up a little bit. And now they hit that spot where they actually need $5,000. We got it. But more than the $5,000, we also can provide some insight and some other mentors as well. But then what we also have done with our professional development is, I'm trying to get any school interested to provide an innovation open source learning class. Now they say, well, wait a second, we have an entrepreneur class. That's fine. My class is not an entrepreneur class until it becomes one. Mm-hmm. We have this entrepreneurial insight, and this sounds rhymey, but I know you'll know what I mean. Our mindset is we create seekers and peakers, not moaners and groaners. Opportunity seekers are out there looking. We talk about trends. We spot, and that's what also makes you, by the way, when you're a peaker, you can see things about a year ahead of everybody else and you can jump on it. We've had some kids get on some seriously cool things before they were cool and monetize it. And so, I'll work with elementaries and middle schools too, to set up an ecosystem and how to have a good, vertically aligned Genius Hour program. But then, at the high school level, I have some mindset stuff. We have a course out there. Actually, we heard a lot from homeschool networks. So quite frankly, it's not just for schools, a lot of them for the homeschool network. But we have kind of an entrepreneur 101, very basics. But a lot of the first part is is on the mindset on your own personal branding, how you leverage that, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the LLC side. And then again, the foundation is just wonderful. We run a cohort for our state of young entrepreneurs under 18. Then we also do these in-person events. We're going to be expanding to 9 cities in this next 2 quarters of 2019. And then we're going to go out of the state because we got their blessing. And so we're going to go to another 6 cities here, hopefully before 2019 is over. And those events are just magnificent because, quite frankly, and it's a guy from down your street, a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, that was really kind of put my face to it. He's like, most schools, it'll take them 2 years to change their mind. So if you're a sophomore, you're screwed. He says, so why don't you start doing things for kids that can go to somewhere else other than a school to have these experiences? And that's exactly what we did. We do monthly events that ties in the local nonprofits. And then also we have mini pitch competitions. We give away $500 for little mini grants.
Well, hopefully you might consider the Boston area for one of these events in the near future. We'd love to have you out this way. Maybe we can set something up.
Yeah.
I also kind of want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned Gary Vee and saying that the sophomores are, you're touching them just a little too late. And I'm wondering what advice you have for folks like us in the Inspired Learning Project. We see a lot of synergy and overlap in terms of core values, because we're not only just trying to make a difference in education, but we're also trying to build a network of like-minded people so we can share ideas. What advice do you have for teachers who are looking for these types of networks and also want to get actionable? What's kind of the first step, would you say, towards making your either course more entrepreneurial or making your course a little bit more open source? Where's kind of the first entry point?
Creating a culture.
More about that?
Yeah. In some cases, I like to turn it over to them, and they create some new rules and new guidelines for us. We talk about their expectations. I'm heavy on reflection. I've changed the way I've graded. When I wrote the book, it had a kind of a formula in there. Since then, because they tried to game the system, and so now I'm like, you reflect on your journey, and you tell me what you deserve this week or 2 weeks. And that has helped, because if they're honest with me and they're honest with themselves, they're moving forward. If they want an A, great. I mean, jump through that hoop. But you're not going to, and that's not necessarily going to make you successful. So that culture of I'm here to better myself over better my GPA is everything. And that whole, I tried it, I hate it, I'm moving on. They know that I'm not going to penalize them. Like sometimes I'll even joke around. I'm like, if you paid, was it $110 to go into Disney, and you went in and you bragged to everybody, so I paid my ticket and I took a nap. Like, okay. And Disney had your money. You want to maximize that experience when you go into Disney. If a kid walks into my class and he says, I'm just gonna bluff my way through some reflections, and I'm just gonna tell you what you want to hear, and I'm gonna get an A, I'll be like, okay. But you're missing out on building a network. You're missing out on trying things that you said that you wanted to do. And so once they get that culture, then they're off to the races. Otherwise, they're playing the game of school. And I mean, you get that 4.3. Good for you. But you're going to miss out on some seriously cool experiences. So I'd prefer them going to build that culture and really grasping what it is that challenges. Because I personally think the hardest thing in the world to do is to do the things that you tell yourself you're going to do. Mm-hmm. I'm going to sort of get up at 5 a.m. and working out. Yes, you do that. It's hard. So if they can do that, then that culture builds, and then the kids start holding themselves accountable. And by the way, it's not easy. Like, again, I'm not batting 100% in my own class. And this is my 8th year of doing this class, 21st year of teaching. And we're still not batting 1,000.
So, and I think one of the challenges too is that, you can create the culture in your class, but there are also external factors, the school culture, the community culture. How do you shift the narrative both at the school and kind of the community level where this type of work is valued versus the, make sure you get your GPA up so you can go off to college? How do you kind of push up against the traditional story that we've either internalized as adults or, tell students as we're going along in the process?
Two different tracks here: either champion the unchampioned and get on TV.
Okay.
Or the newspaper or the radio or whatever. Champion the unchampioned. I've seen several schools. I've even worked with several that they make this kind of thing we're talking about the alternative ed program. And that's awesome. Because also when those kids, and I'm using my air quotes, those kids start doing those amazing works, then all of a sudden people are like, wait, this is cool. Well, now you're going to change the culture a little bit. Because honestly, the hardest part I had was converting the 4.3 GPA kid or their parents. Like, well, your class isn't weighted, Mr. Wettrick. My son needs a weighted class because he needs another blah, blah, blah. Okay, good luck. But I like sometimes starting off with the, what do they call it? I guess more traditionally underserved communities, right? So there's that. But then also, like you said it at the very beginning of the show, I'm really transparent. We'll do live streams from my class every now and then. I'll walk around with my phone. I'm like, tell everybody what you're doing. Oh, I'm working on and they'll say it. And parents like that. Parents like to see their kids successful other than in memorizing things. My son memorized the SAT. Yay. My son coded an app. Oh, okay. That's awesome. In my opinion. Not that the SAT thing isn't, never mind. Good for them. But
so I'm also thinking about what kind of shifts need to happen at the school level to make this experience a little bit more consistent. So it's one thing to be in that class for the 90 minutes with, Mr. Wettrick, but then, if you're going to other classes which are replicating the old model, what advice do you have for administrators and teacher leaders about some of the structural changes they can make to school that would improve and facilitate this type of open source learning?
I mean, in some ways, some of the kids have a hard time with that class is so unstructured and I dare say fun. And then going to the very structured, they sometimes drag their feet. That being said, it's funny. I used to tell my students I shouldn't have a job in another 2 or 3 years. And why is that? I'm like, because I'm the innovation coordinator of the school. And if I work with more teachers to be more innovative at the high school, there's no need for an innovation class. And I always remember Kayla goes, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. They're very comfortable with me. And she's like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, why? And she's like, because this deserves its own time. She says, you wouldn't tell an English teacher and a math teacher and a social studies teacher to be more artistic. You have an art class. She says, if we had a little innovation project for English and a little innovation project for math and an innovation project for social studies, we wouldn't get to the core knowledge. She's like, there are some things that are just fundamental and they're not going to be innovative, and that's okay. This is my playground of innovation. I have never forgotten that conversation. Thank you, Michaela Gilbert. So, and I agree with her. I think that it's okay in some other parts of the day are, I hate to use the word more traditional, but it's okay that it's traditional. This is your creativity time. And really based on the first Dan Pink thing I listened to, it was 1 day a week where you got to be creative. That's fine. So I have 1 period a day in my class schedule, or they have 1 period a day in their class schedule that's creative. Awesome. Do that. It doesn't, I don't know. I would love it if the whole school was more forward thinking and innovative, but I don't think it's it's not a death sentence for a kid if they're not. If they're really, 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 traditional and there's this class, I think that's at minimum, it's a great start.
Don, I just wanted to jump in for a second and see if I can ask you to play fortune teller for a minute. And based on your experience in the classroom and then having interviewed so many people, both in the business space and in the educational space and even recently politics, we got the urgency, the urgency to change is there, and you got the proof of concept with these amazing young entrepreneurs and the things that they can accomplish. But then that bumps up and creates this tension with, standards, what college acceptance criteria is, and accountability systems. So you look ahead in the next 10 years, where do you see education, public education in a decade?
this is the part where I'm not well liked. I think we're going to see a massive shift. And I think that it might be even politically, we always have these massive pendulum swings. I think we're going to fall in love with the online thing. I think we're going to fall in love with the, the only thing is, so if we fall in love with the online thing, then we as human beings long to be together. And I think school will go through this pendulum swing when we'll go back to still going to school. But I think that there will be all of a sudden this, because of a bad economy, because of, I hate to say it, AI just driving entire careers away, there'll be this whole, what is it? The necessity is the mother of all invention. Like, we will no longer teach the things that have been completely automated. Now it'll completely have to decimate those industries. It's like right now, no one is going to be in the coal delivery business. No one's going to be in the VCR rewinding business because they're gone. So we stopped. Education is so slow, but it's eventually going to have to say, okay, we seriously don't need to ever offer this again because it's gone. So how long will that take? Sooner than we think. And I think your prediction of about 10 years is about right. Think of it this way. The iPhone and life as we know it has changed so dramatically. It's 11 years, right? I think it's about 11 years. So I think we're going to see a lot of classes go away. I think we're going to see a little bit more, believe it or not, I think we're going to see a return to spirituality, more return to wellness. Because if you really want to play out this weird, bizarre scenario, and if you want to go all Ray Kurzweil, we're gonna there's gonna be a lot of things that I don't want to call it the Wall-E effect. You know, if you've watched Wall-E, you know how Wall-E ends. But there's gonna be so many things for us not to do. We're gonna have to invent new things for us to do. And I think a lot of the focus on human interaction and compassion and spirituality will be really at the top of that list.
And we have now...
Did I completely weird everybody out?
We've now hearkened to the singularity. So...
oh, you know exactly. Okay, you're picking up what I'm putting down. All right.
So, Don, I'm curious about who influences you. So, what are you reading right now? What do you recommend for educators who have, a couple 5 minutes here or something to read right before bed?
So what am I reading now? That's a bad question to ask because I tear through them. I tear through them. Who's influencing me? My dad. My favorite quote in my book, my dad's. Son, I don't care if you teach for the next 20 years. Just promise me you won't teach 20 years one time. Still sticks with me. Still love that man, as I do my mom. Love you, Mom. But my dad influences me heavily. Books that you have to... The 2/3 of the book Bold by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. The Innovation Rules by Tina Seelig. Way up there. It's like asking me what my favorite child is. Robert Greene's, both either the 48 Laws of Power or Laws of Human Nature. Whoa. That's just scary stuff. 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss, if you really want to question everything about your life. And then, gosh, what else? I don't know. There's just so many. That's a good start. Yeah. Oh, the Drive by Dan Pink. Although I will say Free Agent Nation, which he wrote in 1999, has completely evolved. Whatever he talked, like the things he talked about in that book are here. It's amazing.
So we've got our reading list. We've got everything we need to move forward. Make sure you check out Don's podcast. We got links into the blog, into the email. I just want to thank you again for joining us, Don. We really appreciate your time and most of all, your insights. It's been a really intriguing conversation. So
I thank you for having me on. I hope I didn't go too off the rails. So at least we know what the singularity is. And if you want more information about teacher finances, seriously look up the 457 plan. I love it.
And one more time, where can we find you, Don? Where can we connect? Where should we be looking?
My favorite place here lately has been LinkedIn. There's no politics on LinkedIn. People are happier on LinkedIn. So Don Wettrick on LinkedIn, at Twitter where people are angry, at Don Wettrick, Facebook. We have a Facebook page for our foundation, facebook.com/StartEdUp Foundation. And then the podcast, StartEdUp.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Don. I appreciate it.
We'll see you guys. Thank you.